Do you have questions about buying fine lumber for furniture projects? Or would you wonder why I would say, don't buy this board? We are talking tonight about material acquisition or going to buy lumber for your given project. Been thinking about that a lot this week because we've been building this workbench, and a number of people have asked about how do I buy materials for a project like that. I don't know what to do at the lumberyard, what to look for. So I want to share one of the things that is probably the first thing I look for when deciding on what to buy for lumber at a lumberyard. If you haven't been before, up in this part of the country, in New Hampshire, the Northeast, there's a number of retail-friendly hardwood dealers that when you enter, they'll have multiple bins down one wall with all different species of wood you can choose from, and in the different sizes of those species. So you're looking at the ends of all these boards. So you're kind of looking at the cutoff of the trees all in front of you. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's just look at this drawing right here. This is a, I don't know, I guess I'll hold it right here. All right, so it's just a sketch to show the end cut of a log. And you've got all these circle marks. And if this is very new to you, those circle lines are actually marking 1 year of growth. Usually when you have the dark line is the later growth, where it's probably like late summer and going into fall and winter. You get these harder, typically in general, darker growth rings that mark that period. And then it gets lighter again in the spring and summer. You have this kind of fast, hardy growth. That's the time the tree is full of leaves and it's really thriving. But then it starts to lock down again and gets a harder ring. But this creates this kind of history, a living history. So when the tree is cut, you can count back from those outer rings and find out exactly how old that tree was. And maybe it brings back some memories of how old you were when this tree started being born. But I wanted you to see this because when you go to the lumberyard, you're looking at the end of boards that were taken from a log like this. You're just looking at the ends. So sometimes, like this board up here is drawn, the growth rings are parallel with the surface. Or sometimes that's called being plain sawn or flat sawn. So the growth rings are long like this. Sometimes the board comes out perpendicular to the growth rings, and you end up with growth rings that are 90 degrees to the surface. And that's often referred to as quarter sawn. And then other times you'll have something in between where it's angular to the surface, and that's referred to as rift sawn. Without going into the whole of the plane and the quarter and the rift, I basically am showing you this because when I go to the lumberyard, the first thing I look at is the end grain. Let me show you one other little picture of this idea, and it's going to take a little muscle for this. Okay. This.
Nothing small with you.
This we've seen before. If you've been hanging around our Shop Night Lives, we flattened this on one of the episodes. This is an ash tree that was cut right behind the shop. In fact, this shop was positioned out of respect to keep this ash tree. Well, you can see that it didn't go that well. About 20 years into its growth, it started to weaken and bugs got into it, and we had to unfortunately take it down. But it's about 34 inches in diameter. And when I took it down, I was so surprised to count the growth rings back from when we cut it to discover it's 185 years old. So we did some checking here and discovered that this was right here, it's 1860. when 61, when Abraham Lincoln was president. So the tree was probably about 8 inches in diameter in 1865.
Amazing.
His presidency here, and all these other little discoveries as we come on out. And you come all the way out here, and right out here, this little line way out here, can you see that?
Yeah.
That's when we moved in. So this was a giant tree, beautiful. But
1997, we should qualify that, yes.
yeah, so this is all, this was all cut. I mean, this could have all been sawn into planks, and some of it we did get for planks. I've got some beautiful 24-inch wide planks downstairs that is just this. But I want you to see this because of the growth rings. Now, note how early on here, we've got, did you notice the spacing of the growth rings? They're set apart by about, a strong 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 inch. So there's quite a lot of growth in just that 2 inches, right? I mean, you'd think, oh, that's going pretty well. Each one representing a year. Sometimes, if it was a colder or lack of much rain, the growth ring the tree is stressed, so it doesn't grow as well. But this was growing pretty well right on through. Quite well. And then what happens is the trees start to thicken around it. So all the trees are growing, and then the canopy of this tree is more starved for light, and so it just begins to grow slower. And the growth rings are closer and closer and closer together as it gets larger and larger. So you can see how tight these are. And that's why a lot of the old forests, where they're thick, when they cut them, you'll often hear them called old growth. They've been there a long time, and you can tell it by how close the growth rings are together. So that's really what I want to introduce tonight is when buying wood, I'm looking at the quality of the wood indicated by the closeness of the growth rings. So when I come up to a bin of all these boards in the lumberyard, first thing I'm thinking is, okay, I know I'm in the right bin for the thickness and type of wood I want. And then I'll think, okay, I know I want them to be so wide. So I'm looking at those widths on end. And then I'm looking at the quality of the growth rings. If those growth rings are wide and far apart, I usually pass. If they're tight or close or reasonable, I'll give that end a check. And I'll just check all the ends of the boards that I want to pull out so I don't have to measure every single one. Once I get several check marks on there, I'll pull those boards out and stand them up and then check for further defects, maybe some knots or splits or checks or sapwood. But invariably, the first thing I look at is the quality of growth rings. Let me show you some examples of that. This is just a couple pieces of walnut. Those numbers on the end don't mean anything, but look at the number of growth rings there. See how wide those are? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Only 8 years in that piece. This one, I counted them earlier, it has 20. So the same species, it's so much better quality. I mean, this is passable. It would look beautiful, right? But it's just a little more blah in terms of the lines in it. Now, there is, with some woods, there's a definite strength factor. I don't know if you've seen, like a lot of times when you buy pressure treated wood at the box stores, you look at those and it's very obvious the dark lines are hard. That tends, in this part of the country at least, to be southern yellow pine that's been treated. So you have these dark annual rings for the later growth, and the early growth is wider and spongier typically. So sometimes you'll pick up one of those boards that's like that and notice how much lighter it is in weight than one that has slow growth or close, good quality growth rings. Let me show you what I actually made a little trip for this just a couple hours ago. I went to the box store nearby, the Home Depot, and just went to the normal construction bin where they have the 2x4s, and I just grabbed a couple 2x4s, but before I did, I was looking at the end grain. So I just picked up these two 2x. This little demonstration cost me $6.70.
Big spender.
I spare no expense for you.
Don't I know?
And the one here on the left, this is the cutoff right from the end rather than holding that whole thing. And check that out. That looks familiar, right? So you're getting the growth rings here. You know what? I don't even know what kind of wood this is. Is this fir or spruce? Someone who's in the building trades. I never really obviously work with this for furniture grade, but so I counted out, this is about 10 years old going out this way. Another way that they determine the density of growth rings is to measure how many per inch. If you just come out per inch, there's only 4. So this was a little bit lighter, and it would be perfectly passable for a stud in the wall. But if you had the choice between this or this one that was right next to it, which would you pick? This was right, literally stacked together like that. So it's similar when you're looking at fine furniture grade wood. The quality doesn't tend to vary this much, but you'd be surprised, especially if you go to a bin that's been picked over a bit, you may get stuck with fast growth material. You might want to pass, or look at some thicker material that you might be able to resaw for your project to get better quality. When I was making a lot more 18th century furniture, we were always using genuine mahogany. And it was so evident when you would come up to a slow growth, dense piece of mahogany, you knew it by the weight. You would pick it up and you'd go, whoa, this is some serious, dense, rich color usually. It was gorgeous stuff to work with. And then there was some that clearly was inferior. It just maybe grew too fast, almost like Luan. But for the most part, you could count on genuine mahogany being a beautiful texture and good grade. But it did vary tree to tree, so you had to look out even in that case. This piece was 10 years old that I showed you, and this piece is 38 years old.
Wow.
So you're talking almost 30 years difference in a 2x4. Let me show you a couple other examples of this that I love, and that is the new railing that I'm going to have on the house here. This is like the railing we put behind the shop, if you've been around that long. This is a piece of heart pine that I salvaged out of an old cottage, that country home that was torn down in North Carolina. When I was driving up to Bugs one day, I went, oh my gosh, they just tore that down? They're just throwing all that wood out. What a shame. And so I grabbed some of the boards. I did, but I was shocked to see the quality. I picked this up and I was excited. But it literally, wouldn't you be? What is this? This is only not even 3 inches. Oh yeah, 3 inches. Do you know that this piece is 103 years old? Across 3 inches of thickness.
Crazy.
So isn't that beautiful? And we actually used some of this stock, if you recall. We quarter sawed it. I could rip this board this way, so I end up with the grain perpendicular, which creates this beautiful, stable material and also a very attractive linear look. And that's what we made this drafting board. What do you call this? A straight edge, square? I forget the right name.
I don't know.
Someone who's a drafter. What did we make back when we did this?
Like
but
an
it's not a T square. It's got, I guess it could be, but I put the double end on it.
Someone will have a feel for what it is.
Yeah, we did an episode of making this, if you wanted to make one, on Shop Night Live. And it has a hard maple edging to it on both sides. That was a fun project. And someone actually I remember won this at our epic weekend, one of the other ones that I was working on. All right, so then this is the same material. This is going to be the railing going into our house from the garage.
Ooh.
And check that out. This one measures 28 rings per inch. So 28 years per inch. Across that angle there is 72 years.
Wow.
That's crazy, right?
That
Older
is
than you.
crazy.
You're
Yeah.
going to be grabbing that, feeling the quality, saying, I just took my time. And this is a plank of soft maple that I just got for the bench, for the workbench project. This is going to be one of the legs.
Gosh.
And you can
Stout.
see, look at that amount of rings there. This is 73 years across there.
That's so cool.
Just good soft maple. It's something like 50 just or more across this edge. So this, you can see the grain coming in there, quarter sawn. Isn't that beautiful? I don't have it smooth, but you can see you get this beautiful beeswing figure in the maples, all that little flecking
Wow.
when you hit the quarter sawn surface. So that's going to make a beautiful base or post.
So Tom, what do you do if the end is painted and you can't see the grain?
Yeah, that's a bummer. Usually that is not the case, but it can be. So, you know what I do? I bring a spoke shave typically, not for the end grain, but for the face grain. Like if I wanted to see the color of this. So let's say you were going to buy cherry. It's hard to tell all the time if it's quite pale or darker look. And you needed to know that these boards were going to match well one to another. I would take spoke shave with me and just score off some material and take a look at it, you know, compare it. They don't care. You're not really, it's rough, so you're barely taking any dimension away. Then you could do the same with the maple. And obviously we can see it already, but I've already ripped that. But it comes with that rough and the color change, so you'd see how white or dark it's going to be. Now you could use the same spoke shave across the end grain, and that'll give you a look at it. Usually the growth rings telegraph through whatever paint is on the end, if you look in the right light. But once in a while, yeah, you're right. But quite often they've been cut, and the majority of times you're going to be able to see the rings.
I
That's a
have a
good
couple
question.
questions. Have you
Yeah.
ever worked with old barn beams? I think
Yes.
I know the answer to that.
Oh yeah, I love them. I actually almost brought one up to show you because we built this timber. It was like an old record chest, like one of these high, you know how people are retro going back into the, what do they call them? Those fuses. What do they call the old records? They had the little
albums?
fuses. No, they
Records.
They had the power. They had the little fuses. Is that right? Tubes. The tubes in there, whatever. Anyway, it's supposed to produce this richer analog type sound. And we made a beautiful timber container for that. And all the staves were made from an old barn beam. I didn't even know what kind of wood it was. I think it was like hemlock or something, not typically furniture grade. But the growth rings were so tight, it was insane. So it came out of an old home that was torn down, taken down by a friend of mine who was a timber framer, and he had this barn stored for a little while, but it was over 200 years old when he took it down, so you could tell it was just built by the timbers around it that were old growth. The growth rings were insanely tight, easily, like it was 80 to an inch. It was crazy. And when it gets like that, the same species that's old growth is almost unrecognizable to what we see now available for sale. It's so tight and linear that it's just almost a different species. So makes it interesting. It makes it, that's what we had, all this really tight combed grain across the timbers. And it was so sweet. You just open that baby up. It was a very nice piece.
Do the more growth rings help the board not warp?
It can still, but I have found in working with old growth, it tends to be really stable, especially, it's more a factor of how you cut it. Like plain sawn is less dimensionally stable because the trees seasonally expand and contract along the line of the growth rings. So if you think of the growth rings lying in plane with the top of the board, those are going to expand and contract more than if the growth rings oriented perpendicular to the top like this straight edge. So you have all of those. And typically, if you want something to stay flat and straight and stable, you're going to resaw it or orient the grain so that you have quarter sawn facing up. So
Armin's curious. He says, I'm building a new shop door. The stiles and rails will be the stave core construction, 2 1/4-inch skins of white oak, and the core is 1 1/4 inch. Should I go with the oak for the core, or is poplar okay?
Oh, I think poplar's fine. I would try to flip the poplar up on edge, right? You're going to be laminating it with staves and then sheeting it over. Typically, all the interior core is going to be flipped up on edge. And if it's plain sawn to start with, you're going to just rip it, dress it, and flip it up on edge. You're going to have quarter sawn along the top, and then you're going to skin over it, and you're just going to have a rock solid, stable core there. It doesn't hurt. You don't need, I think oak on the interior would be a bit of overkill. Plus it's going to add a lot of weight to the door. As long as you get that oriented quarter sawn and you're going to skin it over a 1/4 inch material, that's going to be beautiful. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Okay. Well, any other questions? We're good?
I don't see any here.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I just love discovering beautiful wood. And when you head to the lumber yard next time, I hope you enjoy that tip and check out that end grain and get the best available. Remember, if you like this content, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. And also check out our website at epicwoodworking.com. It's not even too late to get in on this course of building the bench. We've got some cool offers over there. And also the neighborhood, which is the community that's really amazing to be part of. Well, thanks again for hanging out with us a little bit in the shop. On behalf of the camera and myself,
yes,
we look forward to seeing you next time, right back here on Shop Night Live. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. See you next week.